So last week I was reading through some of the comments on my channel and I found something that just struck me a little bit funny. And it was somebody who said something along the lines of, "Nate, I aspire to be as cheap as you one day." And I think this is something that we really need to address because, as you know, we talk about personal finance on this channel. It's one of the biggest topics on this channel. We try to help people financially, whether it's getting out of debt, making more money, just putting themselves in a better position, right? And especially because most Americans, most people in the world are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't cover a basic emergency bill. So it's something that we're really, really passionate about. But I don't want people to get the wrong message here and to think that we're telling people to be cheap. And there's a very, very large difference and a very distinct difference between being cheap and then being somebody who's just conscious about their spending, is very on top of their finances, and maybe potentially frugal. So frugal versus cheap, there's a very large difference, and we're gonna discuss that in this video. But essentially the way that I view this is that there's really a number of different resources in our lives besides just money. And I think sometimes people think that like I put money at the top and then every other resource sort of behind that. But that's not the case, and we really need to clarify that in this video. So not only is money an asset, it's probably the most tangible asset in the sense we can see it, we know how much we have in our account, so it's easy to measure. But there's other assets that are very important as well, such as time. How much time do you have left in your life? I don't want this to sound, like depressing, but it's true. Time is one of our greatest assets. You've probably heard me say that like many other videos, so we're not gonna get into that too much. But damn it, something in my eye. But there's other resources as well, like your health, because what the hell's the point in having money or any other thing like relationships if your health is declining and you're gonna die? Like let's face it, your health is very important and it's an asset that a lot of us take for granted. So we need to take care of our health and our bodies so that we're living long lives. But not only health, time, and money, but even relationships. Having a network of people, whether it's family, whether it's friends, coworkers, people at church, wherever, having a good relationship with many people throughout your life is going to be an asset that I think a lot of people do take for granted, or they just don't take into consideration as well, which is something that I consider to be an asset. So really those four are some big assets that we need to think about. And the problem with people who are cheap, they end up sacrificing these things like time, relationships, and their health so that they can save money. And this is the problem. So let's kind of talk about some of these examples, but first we're gonna discuss the difference between being cheap and being frugal. And I think being frugal is okay. It's okay to save money on areas in your life where you don't want to spend money. That's okay. But the biggest difference here is that people who are cheap are generally cheap towards other people. Whereas frugal, the way that I view it is that for frugal people, it's okay to be cheap towards yourself in some areas of your life, but it's never okay to be cheap towards other people. That's kind of how I live. That's kind of my rule of thumb. And so an example here is people who don't tip at restaurants. There's very few people that I hate in life that I really just don't like. I don't care like who you are, what your political beliefs are, your religion, your race, I really don't care. I dislike very, very, very few people in this world. But the people that I don't like, especially in America because we have a pretty large tipping culture, are people who don't tip at restaurants or if they get a haircut somewhere, and that person who's doing this service for you relies heavily on tips, especially in America, right? So I don't know why people do this. I think it's just because they're too selfish or something, but I think it's always important to tip very well. And there's actually studies on this that you can look into and read about. But generally giving things to other people is going to make you personally happier. And obviously it makes that person happier in most cases as well, which is important. But I just found that for myself that, if you go get a haircut and you tip twice the price of the haircut, that's not only going to make that person's day, but it's also going to make you feel better as well. And I think it's important. So that's just something that I like to do, and I don't want that to sound like I'm sounding like I'm better than other people. That's not the point of this. But my point is, I don't like people who don't tip at restaurants, or they tip like 5% or 10%, even when the service is very good. I don't like when people do that. So being cheap towards other people, it's never cool. Somebody who's cheap would say skip going to a wedding because they don't want to buy the person a wedding gift. That's a cheap person. Don't be that person. Being frugal, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Being frugal is somebody who maybe you understand that you are willing to maybe turn your thermostat down a little bit so that the average temperature is 62 degrees instead of 72 degrees like the average, right? That's being frugal, and it's really only affecting you if it's only like you living in your apartment or in your house. that's okay because it's only affecting you. But if it's affecting other people, then it becomes a problem in my opinion. So another case where being cheap actually ends up hurting you is when you factor in something called opportunity cost. And I love bringing this up on my channel. It's one of my favorite terms. But there's times where people, let's take, I think it's TLC, the Learning Channel, talking about extreme cheapskates, right? I think that's the title of the show, Extreme Cheapskates. I've watched a few episodes, and people on this show literally will like go out of their way. They'll spend like 7 hours to pick up like a few pennies, and they'll make like $4 over the course of 7 hours. And I think it's important to understand that time is a very valuable resource. And if you're spending 7 hours to do something that's going to save you $4 or make you $4, is it worth it? Probably not, at least not to myself. I set tasks for myself that I say, you know what, is this task going to be worth it? Should I, go out of my way to save $5 if it's going to take me an hour? And I know that my time personally is worth more than $5 an hour, and you need to set a time for yourself or a dollar amount for yourself to say anything that I'm doing is not worth anything less than $7 an hour or $10 an hour, any task that I'm doing. So I think it's important to set those numbers for yourself so that you're not kind of like running around pinching pennies to the extent where you're actually like spending all of your time doing something to save a few dollars. It's totally not worth it. People who are frugal think about the long-term value of something. So if you're looking at, say, buying a car, right? A cheap person would simply buy the least expensive car. And the problem with this is that the car might not be any good quality, but they went for the lowest price, and it could break down. They have more problems. It could be a safety problem. It doesn't have airbags that work. It has other issues with it. It's rusted out. It's gonna fall apart on the road. That's something that cheap people will tend to do. Whereas a frugal person might say, you know what, I'm gonna buy a car that's a 2015 or 2016 car. It gets very good gas mileage. It's going to last very long because it's a pretty decent brand. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for it because I know in the long run, when I average out, it's going to actually save me money. That's somebody who's frugal, and it makes more sense doing that versus the cheap kind of short-sighted approach from a financial standpoint. As far as health goes, people who are cheap tend to skimp out on healthcare. Not only will they potentially not pay for health insurance, but I've seen this happen with a lot of people that I know, to be honest, is that they'll have maybe like a lump on their leg, or they'll have a problem and they won't go to the doctors because they don't want to spend the money on it. I don't know why people do this, especially if you have the money available. I'm not talking about like if you have literally nothing, then that's a little bit more understandable. But if people are cheap and they just don't want to go to the doctors to get something checked out that could be something that could develop into a much more serious problem in the future, that's a serious mistake in my personal opinion, because you're potentially sacrificing your health. And what good is having money or having any other resource if you have no time and you have no health, because you're gonna die tomorrow or you're gonna die next year because you haven't been eating the right foods, you haven't been taking care of yourself, you haven't been working out. So those are essentially kind of like the reasons as to why you don't want to be cheap. It's okay to be frugal. It's okay to save money in areas, especially if you're really trying to like get into a better financial position. But the biggest key, just don't be cheap towards other people, guys. Really don't. It's just not cool all around. It's not. So thanks for watching the video, and I'll see everybody in next week's video.